The rain had started just after sunset, drumming softly against the diner's wide windows. The neon sign outside flickered in stubborn rhythm, Millie's Diner, glowing half-heartedly against the wet street. Inside, the smell of brewed coffee and fried onions hung in the air. It was a slow Tuesday night, the kind of night when regulars lingered over empty plates just to stretch the hours. Sarah Miller wiped down the counter for the third time, not because it needed cleaning, but because she needed something to do. Her uniform was a little faded, the pink apron strings tied tightly around her waist. Her son, Lucas, sat in a corner booth coloring in a tattered sketchbook, his sneakers barely touching the seat edge. She kept glancing his way, a mix of exhaustion and tenderness in her eyes. He was all she had left that made the long hours bearable. The bell over the door jingled as a man stepped in, shaking off his umbrella. He was tall, in his early 40s, dressed too well for this kind of place, tailored suit, expensive shoes, and an air of someone who was used to being served, not serving. He scanned the room, his expression unreadable, then chose a booth near the window. Sarah grabbed a menu and approached him with her best professional smile, the one that hid the ache in her feet and the worry at the back of her mind. "Evenin', coffee to start?" she asked. He looked up from his phone, his eyes a deep, cool gray. "Yes, please, black." His voice was low, measured. She nodded and turned away, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't name. There was something about him, not threatening, just distant, as if he lived in another world entirely. When she set the coffee down, he barely looked up. "You can keep the menu," he said. "Just the coffee's fine." She hesitated. "Sure thing." Then, unable to help herself, she added, "You sure you don't want a slice of pie? It's fresh." He gave the faintest smile. "Maybe later." As she walked back to the counter, she noticed the time, past 9. Her shift should have ended an hour ago, but the other waitress called in sick. She sighed. At least Lucas had finished his homework. "Mom," he called softly from the booth. "Can I get pancakes?" Sarah glanced toward the register and bit her lip. Payday wasn't until Friday, and her tips had been lousy all week. But Lucas looked so hopeful, his pencil hovering midair. "Just one short stack, okay," she said, forcing a smile. He grinned and went back to drawing. A few minutes later, she rang up the order, mentally counting the bills in her wallet. She could make it work, maybe skip gas for a day or two. She served the pancakes, watching Lucas dig in with a joy that almost made her forget the math. Then she heard the door open again. A gust of cold wind swept through. Her heart dropped when she saw the man from the corner stand up, walking toward the counter. She hurried over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Everything okay?" she asked. He nodded slightly, pulling out a credit card. "Just the coffee." She reached for the register, but just then, Lucas came running up, holding his coloring book. "Mom, look, I drew you and me at the park." Sarah smiled, but the man's gaze flicked briefly toward the boy, softening just a fraction. He slipped the card back into his wallet. "Add his meal to my bill," he said quietly. Sarah froze. "Oh, you don't have to." He shook his head. "Please." Her cheeks flushed. "Sir, that's kind, but really, I can." He looked at her, and for the first time, she met his eyes fully. There was no condescension there, just a calm certainty. "Let me," he said simply. Something in her chest tightened. She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." He paid, left a bill under the saucer, and turned to go. Sarah called after him, her voice small but steady. "Sir." He paused by the door. "I'll pay you back when I can," she said. Her words were almost a whisper, but they carried. He studied her for a long moment, this woman in a worn apron, standing tall despite everything pressing down on her. Then he gave a small nod, almost a bow of respect. "I know you will," he said. When he left, the bell chimed softly, and the rain kept falling outside. Sarah stood still for a moment, watching the taillights fade into the distance, not knowing that her simple promise had just changed both their lives. Ethan Cole couldn't get her voice out of his head. "I'll pay you back when I can." It was such a simple phrase, ordinary, really, but it had followed him all the way back to New York like a ghost that refused to fade. In his penthouse office overlooking the skyline, the city gleamed like a constellation of glass and steel. Everything he'd built, Every number on every report was right where it should be. Yet for the first time in years, it all felt hollow. He sat behind his desk, staring at the reflection of himself in the dark window. What was it about her? He thought. The woman in the diner hadn't asked for pity. She hadn't pleaded or tried to charm him. Her voice had carried a kind of quiet dignity, the kind money couldn't buy. Mr. Cole, his assistant's voice broke his thoughts. Your next meeting is in 10 minutes. Cancel it, Ethan said without looking up. She hesitated. Sir, it's with the Tokyo investors. I said cancel it. His tone was calm, final. When the door closed, he exhaled slowly and leaned back in his chair. He opened his phone and scrolled through his calendar, then paused. Somewhere between board meetings and earnings calls, he had forgotten what real people's lives looked like. That night, unable to sleep, he found himself looking up Millie's Diner online. It was a small-town place, independent, family-owned, barely surviving. Reviews spoke of home-style meals and friendly staff, but recent ones mentioned price hikes and cut-back hours. He frowned and dug deeper, tracing the business through public records. The owner was 2 months behind on rent. The diner was hanging by a thread. The next morning, Ethan called his legal team. Find out who owns the property housing Millie's Diner, he instructed. His team didn't ask why. They knew better. Within hours, the file was on his desk. He studied the numbers, the overdue rent, the interest penalties, the pending foreclosure notice. He closed the file. Settle the debt, he said. Excuse me, sir, his assistant asked carefully. Pay it off, quietly. Use the foundation account. Yes, Mr. Cole. He ended the call and sat in silence for a moment. He didn't even know why he was doing it. Maybe it was guilt, maybe curiosity, or maybe, for once, it was simply because he could. Meanwhile, in that same small town, Sarah was having one of the worst weeks of her life. The diner owner had cut everyone's hours, saying they couldn't afford overtime. The electric bill was overdue, and she'd just received a notice from her landlord about late rent. She stared at the paper in her trembling hands, feeling the walls close in. Lucas sat at the kitchen table, humming as he drew spaceships in his notebook. Mom, look, he said, holding up his picture. That's us, we're going to space. She smiled faintly, her throat tightening. It's beautiful, honey. She tucked the notice into a drawer, pretending it didn't exist for now. Later that night, when Lucas was asleep, she opened her small tin box of savings. $43 and some coins. Not enough for rent, not enough for hope. And yet, she still thought of the man at the diner. The way he had looked at her, not like she was a burden, but like she mattered. She hadn't forgotten her promise. Every week, she set aside a few dollars, telling herself she'd find a way to pay him back. Days later, the diner buzzed with strange news. The owner was pacing, waving a letter. Someone paid off the building. He shouted. Anonymous donor. The debt's cleared. The staff exchanged bewildered looks. Sarah stood frozen behind the counter, heart hammering. That means we're not closing. One cook asked. No, we're safe, the owner said, almost laughing. Completely safe. Sarah felt her knees weaken. Relief flooded her chest so suddenly it almost hurt. She leaned against the counter, whispering to herself, thank you, whoever you are. Back in New York, Ethan received a simple confirmation message from his foundation office, property cleared. No further action required. He closed his laptop, stood, and looked out over the city again. The lights shimmered, endless and cold. Yet for the first time, he felt a flicker of warmth inside him, something small, but real. He didn't know it yet, but the promise that had haunted him was just beginning to change him. Sarah stood outside the glass tower, craning her neck to see where it ended. The building seemed to pierce the clouds, all mirrored panels and sharp edges, reflecting a world she didn't belong to. Her palms were damp, and the envelope in her hand felt suddenly too small, too simple for the purpose it carried. Inside was the money she had managed to save. Not much, but it was hers. Every dollar represented an extra shift, a skipped meal, a night without sleep. She had written his name carefully on the envelope, Ethan Cole. When she first learned who he was, the billionaire investor whose companies she had once worked for, her stomach dropped. Years ago, when Ethan's firm acquired the small publishing company she had loved working at, she had been among the hundreds laid off. She remembered sitting in a fluorescent-lit meeting room while a young executive, reading from a script, told them their jobs were being restructured. She hadn't known the name of the man behind it then. Now she did, and yet, he had helped her without even realizing who she was. Inside the lobby, the air was cool and smelled faintly of marble polish and money. A woman at the front desk looked up as Sarah approached. "Do you have an appointment?" No, but I'm here to see Mr. Cole," Sarah said, trying to sound confident. "It's personal." The receptionist gave her a practiced, polite smile. "Mr. Cole's schedule is very full. If you'd like to leave a message." "I just need 5 minutes," Sarah interrupted, her voice trembling slightly. "Please. He'll remember me." Something in her tone, desperation wrapped in sincerity, made the receptionist pause. She picked up the phone, murmured something into the receiver, and then said, "Take the elevator to the 48th floor. His assistant will meet you there." Sarah swallowed hard. As the elevator doors closed, she caught her reflection in the polished metal, a tired woman in a thrift store blouse and scuffed shoes. "What am I doing here?" she thought. "He won't even remember me." When the doors opened, she stepped into a world of quiet luxury. The walls were lined with abstract art, and the floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the space in soft morning light. Ethan's assistant, a composed woman in her 30s, led Sarah to a waiting area. "Mr. Cole will see you shortly," she said before disappearing into another room. Sarah's heart pounded as she sat there clutching the envelope. Through the glass partition, she caught a glimpse of him, the same man from the diner, now in his element, speaking calmly into a headset as people hovered around him with files and tablets. He looked every bit the untouchable executive. A few minutes later, he looked up and saw her. For a moment, his expression didn't change, just the faintest flicker of surprise, quickly masked by composure. He murmured something to his assistant, then gestured for Sarah to come in. She stood, legs shaking, and stepped into his office. It was vast, minimalist, and filled with light. "Ms. Miller," he said, rising from his chair. "This is unexpected." She forced a nervous smile. "I'm sorry to bother you. I found out who you are, and I came to return this." She held out the envelope. "It's what I owe you from the diner. I know it's not much, but..." He didn't take it. "You came all the way here for that." "Yes," she said quietly. "You helped me when I couldn't help myself. And I keep my promises." Something in her voice made him set down his pen. He studied her, really studied her, the exhaustion in her face, the determination in her eyes. "I didn't expect repayment," he said gently. "I know," she replied, "but that's what makes it matter." The silence between them stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You used to work for one of my companies, didn't you?" "Aurora Publishing." Her eyes widened. "Yes. How did you?" "I looked into it," he admitted. "After that night, I wanted to understand why you were struggling. I didn't know it was my company that..." He stopped, his voice tight. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "You don't owe me an apology. Life just happens." He stepped closer. "Maybe, but I can do something about it now." Sarah frowned. "I didn't come here for charity." "It's not charity," he said. "It's an opportunity. I'm starting a foundation to support small businesses and single parents, people like you who never stop trying. I want you to help me run it." She blinked, stunned. "Me? I'm just someone who knows what it means to fight for something real," he said. "That's exactly who I need." For a long moment, Sarah didn't speak. The city stretched out behind him like another universe, but for the first time, it didn't seem unreachable. Slowly, she nodded, tears glimmering at the corners of her eyes. "Then I guess I'll keep my promise another way," she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly, the first genuine smile he'd allowed himself in years. "Yes," he murmured, "you already have." The sun poured through the diner's windows, golden and forgiving. It had been months since Sarah's life had changed, but every morning when she stepped through the door of Millie's diner, she still felt that sense of humble disbelief, like she was walking inside a memory that had chosen to stay kind. The neon sign outside now glowed bright again, repaired and freshly painted, the smell of new coffee beans replacing the old bitterness of struggle. The place was alive. The morning crowd was cheerful, and laughter echoed between the booths. A small, community support program poster hung on the bulletin board, an initiative from the Cole Foundation, which Sarah now managed. It funded local businesses, daycare centers, and skill workshops for parents. And to everyone's surprise, the foundation's first major grant had gone to Millie's, saving it from collapse for good. Sarah moved between tables, greeting customers with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. Her eyes shone brighter now, her steps steady. Life wasn't perfect. Bills still came, and time was still short, but she carried herself differently. She had purpose. "Mom, can I get more syrup?" Lucas called from a corner booth, already halfway through a stack of pancakes. She laughed, pouring syrup onto his plate. "You're going to turn into a pancake one of these days." "I don't mind," he said with a grin, cheeks sticky. With maple. Millie, the diner's owner, passed by, shaking her head fondly. "You two are my lucky charms," she said. "You know that, right? Ever since that miracle donation came through, everything's been turning around." Sarah smiled but said nothing. She never took credit, never mentioned Ethan's name. He had asked her once to let the help speak for itself. No headlines, no stories, just quiet good. She had respected that. Still, she thought of him often. Their last conversation replayed in her mind like a soft song. His calm assurance, the warmth in his eyes when he said, "You already have." Outside, a sleek black car slowed to a stop across the street. From the corner of her eye, Sarah noticed a man step out, his suit simple but expensive. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, gazing at the diner. The morning light caught his face, unmistakable. Ethan Cole. He didn't come inside. Instead, he leaned against the car, watching quietly as Sarah refilled a customer's coffee and laughed at something Lucas said. His expression was unreadable, part pride, part something gentler. When Sarah finally noticed him, her heart skipped. She excused herself, wiped her hands on her apron, and stepped outside. The air was cool, the pavement still damp from an early rain. "You could have come in," she said, smiling. "I didn't want to interrupt," Ethan replied. "Looks like business is good." "It is," she said, following his gaze toward the bustling diner. "We're happy." He nodded. "That's good to hear." There was a pause, not awkward, just full. Two people standing on opposite sides of fortune, connected by something neither had planned for. "Lucas still talks about that night," Sarah said softly. "He says you're like a superhero who buys pancakes instead of fighting crime." Ethan chuckled under his breath. "That's one way to put it." They stood there a moment longer, watching life happen, the waitress calling out an order, the bell above the door ringing, the smell of coffee drifting through the air. "I wanted to thank you," she said finally. "Not just for what you did for me, for what you started. The foundation's helping so many people. You gave them more than money, you gave them hope." Ethan looked at her, his voice quiet. "You did that. I just followed your lead." Sarah's eyes softened. "Maybe we both needed reminding." He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes this time. "Maybe we did." A gust of wind stirred the air between them, carrying the sound of laughter from inside. "I should go," he said after a moment. "I've got another town to visit. More projects." "Of course," she said, though part of her wished he'd stay. He turned to leave, then paused. "Sarah, yes, keep your promise," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She tilted her head, confused. "Keep helping people," he added. "That's the only kind of debt worth paying." And then he was gone, slipping back into the car as quietly as he had appeared. Sarah stood there, watching the taillights fade down the street, her chest full, not of longing, but of gratitude. When she stepped back inside, Lucas looked up. "Who was that, Mom?" She smiled, brushing his hair back. "Just a friend." Lucas nodded, satisfied, and went back to his pancakes. Sarah glanced toward the window one last time, the morning light washing over her face. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel small. She felt seen, capable, part of something larger. Sometimes, she thought, promises don't just bind people, they set them free.